Are we on?
Yep.
Oh, wow. Okay. Hey, everybody. Well, I was expecting a longer delay than that, so thank you so much. All right. Good morning. And last week when we met, we were talking about the bank assets on the T side of the account, or on the T account. So today's going to be a little different because you've got 2 or 3 free response problems you're going to be working. So I don't think we're going to be working as long today because I want to give you that time and I don't want 15 minutes of dead air time there. So we're going to go through the notes. We'll probably be able to get through one of the questions and then we'll probably stop there. I'll send the other 2 questions to you and we'll pick up there tomorrow. Let's get this sheet. I'm going to pretend like we didn't really talk about it too much last time, and we're going to go off of this. Remember, the banks are the people that create the money, right? They're the ones that do that. And when you put your deposit at the bank, you are giving them money to lend out. So a couple of things we just need to remind ourselves about, and if you should have this sheet, but if you don't worry about that. We've got our required reserves, and this is the percent of the demand deposit that must be held in cash. Now, who sets that must rate? Well, that's the Fed, and it is called the required reserves. And remember, your money multiplier goes hand in glove with this. So we take however many times our reserve requirement goes into 100, and that's our money multiplier. So again, if the reserve requirement is 10%, 10 goes into 110 times, your money multiplier will be 10, and so on and so on. All right. The deposit you put in goes into required reserves and excess reserves, ER. This is our source of new loans. This is where the money actually gets created. So the lower the reserve requirement, the more the banks can lend out, and the more money is going through the system. So this is an important part right here. Remember, banks very rarely want to hold any cash at all. The more they lend out, the more they're making. I mean, imagine, let's just say instead of a banker, you're a car dealer. Well, you don't want inventory sitting on your lot. You want to sell it and make money off it. So if you've got cars on the lot, that's money you haven't made yet. Same with a bank. If they have cash sitting in excess reserves, that is money they are not making. They want to lend that out and start getting a return on it. There are some bank property holdings. I believe one of our questions today involves this. You will not be required at this level of economics to really get into the bank property holdings. They're just an asset that the bank has, and it's just noise in your free response question. So don't worry about that. But what is important, we get to number 4, and this is the securities. Now, securities are notes or bonds that banks hold. Who issues these securities? The federal government issues them. Now remember, if the federal government sells us securities, they are taking money out of our system. If they buy securities from us, they are putting money into our system. The Federal Reserve decides how many of these securities to buy and sell in the Federal Open Market Committee. This is a big deal. We'll talk about this more. And then finally, we end up with customer loans. And that's, again, that's going to be noise on the free response question. You at this level will not be getting into the customer loans. But they are bank assets because somebody owes them that money. It's an asset that they have coming in to them. Okay, so again, money creation using excess reserves, ER. Banks create money by lending excess reserves. Now, does it change the money supply? Well, we'll talk about that in just a second because you're going to be asked that question in 2 different ways. You're going to be asked about taking cash out of your house and putting it in the bank. Does that change the money supply? No. Does it change the amount of loans available? Yes. Now, if the government decides to buy bonds from us and they put money into our system, that actually changes the money supply, because that's not money that was in our circulation to begin with. So the money multiplier, also known as checkable deposit reserve. I don't know anybody that calls it that, but they may throw that in one of our questions, who knows. Reserve multiplier comes from this. And I'm kind of meh about this because I have not seen these terms used on the test in any way. So don't worry about it too much. And loan multiplier. They're just different terms that could be applied, but money multiplier is what I've seen in the past. That's what they've used on all their exams. That's the term you need to know. All right. I think that is all I want to cover, on that part there. Now you may take out or use the back of this sheet of paper, and let's talk about, where these funds come from. We talked about loanable funds. I just want to be sure we understand. It's very distracting to me. Okay. For loanable funds, this is what brings buyers and sellers of what? Money together. If you have, let's just say you have $10,000 you're not using and you put it in the bank, you have become a supplier of money. You are putting more money into the loanable funds. Well, you want to earn something on that. That's your interest. There's a buyer out there. There is someone who needs your cash and will take a loan with that cash. That's your buyer. Now remember, simple graph, supply and demand. We have quantity of loanable funds. The price of money is interest. We have a demand for loanable funds, and we have a supply of loanable funds, and they meet in equilibrium. Okay, easy enough graph. So let's talk about the supply and the demand, bringing the buyers and the sellers together. Okay, we're going to do our own little T-chart, supply and demand of loanable funds. Excuse me. Okay, let's start with the category of households. All these categories can be suppliers and demanders. It just depends where they are. So households supply loanable funds with their demand deposits, their time deposits, and anything they hold in a money market. By the way, a money market account is just where you put your cash to get a little bit of interest, not much, and especially not today. I think it's like 0.25%. But if you want just to have the liquidity of it, you can sell it. You can get your money same day or next day, depending on the money market that you choose. Demand deposits usually don't pay very much, if any, interest at all. And time deposits usually pay a little bit, but you're sometimes restricted by bank laws how often you can move money in and out of a time deposit. So money market accounts are the other choice. Anytime you contribute to these, you are contributing money to the loanable funds market. Now, when would a household demand loanable funds? Well, let's start with the biggest one of all, home mortgages. That is a household's biggest demand for money. It is the rare person that can pay cash for a $400,000 house or a $500,000 house. Most people borrow the money for the mortgage. That is a huge draw on our loanable funds. Another things that households buy a lot of are cars. And again, cars are expensive. It's hard to come up with, $60,000, $70,000 if you're looking for that new Ford truck or whatever. So we take out mortgages, we take out auto loans, and then, as most of you are getting ready to head out, education loans. Don't forget your education. That's why your parents are cranky. Close to $100,000 today. So it's a lot of money. It is a big deal. Okay? All right. Another category are firms. Firms supply money to the loanable funds market with retained earnings. And again, you're not going to have to know a lot about that, but companies make money. And sometimes they make money, they pay their employees, they pay all their expenses, they pay the dividend on the stock, they pay the interest on the bond, and they still have cash left over, retained earnings, and they'll invest that with their bank or whatever firm they're using. That supplies money. Firms usually, though, are big drawers of loanable funds, and that is capital. Now, you've seen this before. You've seen it in your circular flow model and your expenditure model of GDP. This is IG, and this is huge. It is an investment. It is an investment in the company. It is an investment in the country. It is an investment in workers. And again, let's just say you are going to build the new, I don't know, Toyota plant. I think there's one in San Antonio, if I'm not mistaken. Let's say they want to branch out here and you want to build a comparable plant to go with it. Well, you're not going to do that at 8% money or 5% money. You're going to find the best rate you can find. So as interest rates start falling, people start demanding capital. And when I say people, I'm talking about the firms start demanding capital and they start investing in their businesses. Another big supplier, of course, is the government. Now, keep in mind, the government doesn't have money. The money they have is yours, so it depends how they use it. But if they're going to tax, then they're going to have the supply go up. If they're raising our taxes and they don't have it earmarked for something else, they'll keep that in loanable funds. And when their taxes are greater than their spending, that is when we have the surplus. Now, when does that happen? Yeah, probably not yet in your lifetime, but it has happened in the past. They also use loanable funds when their taxes are less than what they're spending. And then they have deficits. And we're going to put a star by this because this is going to come back to us with crowding out, and we'll talk about that later. So again, remember, the government is not earning money and they are not contributing. They're just taking your money and they're deciding, yes, you're going to put it in the loanable funds market, or no, you're not going to put it in. You're going to put it in the deficit market and you're going to be a buyer of loanable funds. And then what we call the rest of the world, or foreign investments. We have foreign inflows. Now, I know you've heard that, oh, China owns so much of our debt and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's just an inflow of cash to us. They're supplying us with cash and they're using some of our investments, which gives our bankers cash to lend out here. I don't know if we're going to have time to get into, is a deficit a good thing or a bad thing? It depends, but just know that foreign money comes in and foreign money is drawn out. Foreign governments borrow from our banks, and so sometimes our loanable funds go into a foreign market instead of a domestic market. Okay, this is kind of important, and I understand it's hard to keep in mind, but let's talk about the government's role here. The government has two paths that they can take to affect our loanable funds. So we have monetary policy. Now, the monetary policy is run by the Federal Reserve Bank. The president of the Fed serves at the pleasure of the President of the United States. He or she can be appointed or reappointed as seen fit. The Fed used to be a really big deal, not so much anymore. People don't listen to them like they used to. There's so much politics have gotten involved, and it's not really as separate as it should be. And again, that's not a pro or a con statement. It just is kind of the way that the world has operated in the last couple decades, in the last couple administrations. And we can talk more about that later. So again, not good, not bad, just is. But the Fed sets the discount rate. And the discount rate is what banks can borrow from the Fed. So here's what happens. The banks have reserve requirements, and they're moving so much money every single day that sometimes they meet their requirement and sometimes they don't. But they have to have that cash in the bank at the end of business that day. Let's say they need, I don't know, 100 million to get to their reserve requirement, and they don't have it. Usually what banks will do is they'll call up other banks. Hey, can you lend me 100 million till tomorrow? Oh yeah, sure, I've got that. And they'll trade back and forth constantly. Now when they do that, they're talking about the Fed funds rate. Sometimes the banks don't have the money to lend them, and then the bank has to call dad, if you will, or call the Fed, and they're like, oh yeah, we can't meet our reserve requirements, we have to borrow money, and it's not a good place to be, but that is the rate set by the Fed for overnight lending. Banks that are borrowing at the discount rate are usually in some sort of trouble with their liquidity. Not a good place to be. The other thing is the Federal Open Market Committee, and this is where the Fed can buy or sell bonds and securities to the public. Now they do that going directly to the public, and they also do that through banks and corporations. Remember, buy is putting money in the system. If I buy something from you, I'm giving you cash. I'm putting money in the system. If I am selling the bond, I am taking money out of the system. If we need more liquidity in the system, we are going to be buying bonds. If we want to slow down the economy, we're going to be selling bonds, taking money out of the system. That's the Fed's role. Congress also has a role in this, and these are our fiscal policies. And this is your Congress. So the fiscal policy, they can give us money, as you just saw with the bailout package they passed last week, but generally what they will do is they'll start building whatever, roads, schools, post offices. Now, when they do that, what they're doing is, number one, they're providing jobs. Let's say that I'm going to build a highway from Fredericksburg, well, the loop around Fred. That's a government job. And they need people to actually physically build that road. They need the rebar, they need the tar, they need the concrete that goes into it. So all of these suppliers will be getting paid, and that's all paid with government funding, your tax dollars, but it's providing jobs. So again, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Well, there's really no opinion to that. It just is what it is. During the Depression, the Fed funded the Civilian Conservation Corps, and it was a group, the CCC. It was a group of young men that went all over the country and built parks and lodging, and most of your national parks today, and even a lot of your state parks, you can see buildings that were built in the 30s by the CCC. They were, instead of just handing households cash, they were putting people to work, and that's where the money came from. And of course, when people spend their own money, they generally spend it with some sort of discipline in mind. They want to make their house payments, they want to make their food payments, they want to take care of their children, pay off their medical bills, but they'll spend it, and that's where our fiscal policies come in. Okay, I think we've covered everything I want to cover there. So now what I want you to do, in the papers I sent you, I sent you a paper that looked like this, bond activity. Now remember, the price of a bond moves inversely to the interest rates. Okay? So we're going to kind of talk about that quickly. You bought a $50 bond at face value from the U.S. government, paying a fixed annual coupon of 10%. So a couple of things here. What is a coupon? Well, a coupon is the stated rate of interest, and that's what they're going to pay you. So what interest rate on this will you earn? And what you're going to do is take your coupon payment and divide it by the face amount. So we should be so lucky to find a bond like this. This is a 20% instrument, which I don't even think exists anymore. All right, so you paid what we call face value. $50. You are getting an interest rate of 20% or $10 a year. But let's say you go to the Fed and now you want to sell your bond back and they're going to offer you $40 for the bond. So what is that going to tell us? Well, remember, prices and interest move inversely. So if the price of my bond has gone down, the interest rate value on that bond has gone up. So let's see how this works. The $10 will now be divided by 40. 1/4. So now with that discounted face value price, the bond in effect is paying 25% instead of 20%. So what's happened here, the market interest rates from the time you bought the bond have gone up. Because I'm not going to pay you $50 for a 20% bond when I can go into the market and buy a 25% bond for $50. So I'm going to give you less. Market interest rates have gone up since we bought the bond. And that's why the price has dropped to make up the difference. Okay, so what you're losing in that price is what the market is saying is going to happen here. All right, let's look at the next one. You bought a $500 bond for face value, and it's paying $100. So again, what's our rate of interest? Well, the coupon divided by the face value, another 20% bond. Now we have the exact same scenario, just bigger numbers. What is happening here? The next month we need to sell the bond and we're only going to get $400 for it. The price of the bond has gone down. Interest rates in the market have gone up. No one is going to pay me face value for a 20% instrument when they can pay face value for a 25% instrument. So now we've got our 100 divided by 400, 1/4, 25%. Same scenario, just a little different values of the bond. It doesn't really matter what the value of your bond is. And these are very, very small bonds. Most bonds are in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands increments. All right, here's another thing I want you to consider though. Let's say instead of selling it for $400, you go back to the Fed and the Fed is going to pay you $600 for the bond now. Well, now your price has gone up, which means what? The market interest rate has gone down. Remember, prices, interest rates, exactly opposite. So why would they pay us $600? Well, because the rate that they can get in the market is going to be less than the 20% that we're offering on this bond. So now we have 100 divided by 600, 1/6, 16%, 16 and change, but close enough. So if they're giving us more, market rates have fallen, interest rates, and if they're giving us less, market rates have gone up. Just remember the seesaw, interest rates on one side, prices on the other. All right, we're going to move on to a free response question. Bear with me. And it says, Test 3, AP Macroeconomics, free response question. So here's where it gets a little, well, let's go ahead and work this question together, and then I'm going to turn you loose with another one, and that's probably going to call it because we're not going to really have time. But here we go. These next three questions are so similar and yet so different, so be careful when you're reading through these. Country Z, the required reserve ratio is 10%. Assume the central bank, whenever, it's very rare that AP is going to call it the Federal Reserve. They're going to call it the central bank. It's basically the Federal Reserve of whatever country you're dealing in, and all things being equal, we're assuming that their federal banks work like our central bank does. So you don't have to say, oh, well, gosh, if it's Zimbabwe, it would be different. You don't have to think anything like that. We're assuming all the central banks and all the countries we're talking about are just like our central bank. So anyway, they sell. What does sell? Sell equates with take, right? They're selling us bonds. They are taking money out of the economy. And again, you need to click that as soon as you see that they're buying, put, taking, sell. 4 letters, 3 letters. 50 million in government securities in the open market. So they're telling you this is an FOMC activity. And I would also be really careful here, because if my reserve requirement is 10%, right away, what's your money multiplier? How many times will 10 go into 100? The money multiplier is 10. So lock those things in when you're reading the question. It makes it a little bit easier. All right. Calculate each of the following. The total change in reserves for the banking system. All right. They're not asking us to break this out, but I want to break it out anyway. So if they are selling bonds to us, they are taking money out of the system. And our change in reserves is going to be down $50 million. Now, if the bank was going to take that money out of their, instead of their securities fund, if they're taking it out of required and excess, we'll think this through. If they're taking $50 million out, 10% of that would be required, so $5 million, which means the other $45 million will come out of excess reserves. Make sure you understand that. All right, what is our change in the money supply? Well, again, be careful here, because the maximum change, yes, they're taking $50 million out of the system, but we could have lent that money. And our money multiplier tells us it would have been 10 times the amount going through the system. So they are actually decreasing our money supply maximum $500 million. So you can see where the Fed is kind of in a strange situation. They want to decrease the economy, they want to slow it down, but they have to be careful about what the reserve requirement is, where this money is coming from, and what the overall effect is going to be. Because this is a significant effect in the economy off a $50 million purchase. Okay, use a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market. Show the impact of the bank's bond sale on interest rates. So I'm going to give you a minute to work that out. And then I'll put the answer up for you. Don't overthink this. It really isn't that, it's not that tricky. I'll see if I can do it in a minute. Okay, here we go. First of all, where's our first point in this come from? Interest, quantity of loanable funds, demand of loanable funds, supply of loanable funds, equilibrium quantity, equilibrium interest. Point. You get a point just for drawing the graph. Now, what's the impact of this doing? Well, remember, selling is taking money out, which means if they're taking money out, the banks don't have the money to lend, the supply of loanable funds is going to shift to the left. So we have our shift to the left, supply prime. The quantity of loanable funds has gone down. There's the arrow indicating that, which means what? Well, if there's less of it, the price of it is going to go up. So here's my increase in interest rates. Not too rough. Okay. What will the movement in interest rates do to the price of bonds? Well, again, go back to your teeter-totter here. I have interest rates on one side and face value or price of the bond on the other. So just think to yourself what's happening. Go back to your graph. Interest rates are going up. Good heavens. Sorry. Interest rates are going up. By default, what does that mean? The price of the face value of the bonds is falling. So prices or face value of the bonds is going down. That's the only relationship between interest rates and prices. There's no other one. So as long as you can remember the seesaw, you can figure out what's happening. All right. Would the central bank take the action outlined in an effort to grow or shrink the economy? If your parents go into your bank account and take $1,000 off of your debit card, are you going to be buying stuff? No, of course you're not. So it's kind of the same thing. The central government has said, okay, we're taking money out of the economy. Clearly, that is going to shrink the economy. Now, it's an effort to shrink the economy. Does it work perfectly? Not always. I mean, there's always adjustments. And then it says explain. They are removing, here's your explanation, money from the system. That is your entire explanation right there. They are taking money out of the system. That is money we cannot spend on whatever we would want to spend it on. We're not building the new plant. We're not building the new, or we're not hiring all the extra employees. We're not sending our employees to school. All that's going to stop if that money's not in the system. All right. Any questions? No? Okay, let's see what time it is. I think we're actually going to have time to get through one more. So take out or turn to the 2012 Me-Tierra Bank. Actual AP question. They repeat this question frequently, some form of it. Let me get some paper. Okay, take a minute to read this. The following is a balance sheet for Me-Tierra, and of course it's simplified. They're not going to give you the whole 10K version of this. Required reserves, excess reserves, loans, demand deposits. Remember, these two sides have to balance. There's 85, 90, 100, and there's 100 over there, and this banker has no equity in his bank. All right. A, what's the reserve requirement? B, Luis is withdrawing $5,000 in cash from his checking account. How much will the reserves change based on this withdrawal? What's the effect of M1? Remember, M1, cash, coin, currency, and demand deposits. As a result of the withdrawal, what's the new face value of excess reserves in the balance sheet? And then we're going to make an assumption that the next day John comes in and he is going to withdraw enough to exceed the excess reserves. So one way a bank can meet their reserves is to call in some loans. It's kind of rare that they do that, but we're going to talk about other ways. All right, take, this is going to seem really strange, but I'm going to have dead air here for like 3 to 4 minutes. Start and just quickly get what you think you can do on this question. This is awkward. Standing here not saying anything. Okay, let's go through this together. Let's see how you did. Part A, what is the reserve requirement? Well, that is not too challenging to figure out. The required reserves are $10,000. The demand deposits are $100,000. Our reserve requirement is 10%. Remember, the bank is going to put the least amount of money they have to by law into the required reserves, because if they make that account bigger than they need to, they're just losing money. That's money they can't lend out. Okay? All right. Let me get the whole question. Luis comes in and withdraws $5,000 in cash from his checking account, which is a demand deposit. So let's just think this through for just a minute. My demand deposits are $100,000. My required reserves are $10,000, and my excess reserves are $5,000. So when Luis comes in and makes his withdrawal, how much will the reserves change? Well, okay, so he's withdrawing $5,000. Well, the bank's not going to take all of that out of excess reserves. They don't have to. Where is the first place they're going to want to take it? Well, they're going to divide it into 10% and the other 90%. So what they're going to do, demand deposits are going to decrease $5,000. Required reserves are going to decrease $500, and then excess reserves will decrease $4,500. That still leaves the bank $500 that they can lend if they want to make money off that, and if they have the opportunity. So now my demand deposits are $95,000, my required are $9,500, and my excess are $500. Okay. Okay. Now, part 2 of this, what is the initial effect of the withdrawal on M1? Well, remember, M1 is cash, currency, cash and coin, currency, demand deposit. So all that's happened is he's gone from demand deposit to cash, but he has not moved out of the M1 band. So there is no change to M1. And when they ask you to explain, here's your explanation. M1 is cash, currency, demand deposit. He has not moved out of M1, out of the band of M1 at all. So no change there. And then finally, 3, as a result of the withdrawal, what's the new value of excess reserves on the balance sheet based on the reserve requirement from part 1? All right, so now our change in our excess reserves has gone down $4,500. We now have $500 left. And we kind of answered that when we allotted the withdrawal. Okay, part C. Assume that the next day John comes to the bank and withdraws an amount that exceeds the excess reserves. So John is going to be taking out more than $500. Well, what is the bank going to do to cover its required reserves? And again, this is a situation, and it's really not that big of a deal. Banks find themselves in this situation all the time. This is your overnight money. This is to make your reserve requirement for the Fed. So they have a few options. They can borrow from other banks. And when they do that, they will be borrowing at what we call the Fed funds rate. That is set, well, it's not set by anybody, it's set by the market, and it's a daily rate of money. And they could also borrow, and they don't want to, but they can borrow from, the Fed itself. And again, that's like going to daddy for a bank. Oh, we didn't manage our money properly, we need to borrow some money. It doesn't make them happy. And when they do that, this is the discount rate. You can see where the confusion comes in, because you would think, well, the Federal Reserve would be setting the Fed funds rate, but they're not. They're setting the discount rate. And whatever the Fed sets the discount rate, that starts playing with the Fed funds rate. So it's an easy mistake to make, but don't worry about it. That's more than likely what they would do to cover this cost. They don't have any securities they can sell, and they can't call in any loans. And I think they even mentioned that. Yeah, no loans are called in. All right, so listen, you've got about 2 minutes left, so we're going to let you go probably a minute early. So tonight, if you would please, and we'll meet again tomorrow, but tonight, if you would, see if you can answer this question. The 2001 free response, Janet Smith deposits $1,000 of cash in her holdings into the bank. So answer this question. We'll pick up here tomorrow. We've got some more free response questions to practice tomorrow, and we'll go from there. If you have questions that you weren't able to type today, just put them on Remind, and we'll answer from that also. By the way, if you have not turned in the test that was assigned 2 weeks ago, please get that to me today. I'm going to be scoring that and getting that back to you. All right, you guys, have a great day. Thanks.